Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most trusted voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the most misunderstood areas of the Chris Watts case. And, I've written 11 books on the case, 9 in the Two-Face series and 2 in the Silver Fox series. Around about 4 books were written before the discovery came out. And then Drilling in Discovery, the 5th book, basically picked up the narrative in step with the discovery. Some of the more obvious areas that nobody sort of understands in terms of the Chris Watts case is, for example, Shanann Watts' true income. We don't know what it is. We don't know how much it was. We don't know what you're spending money on in terms of actual specific information, in terms of like an audit. All we can kind of go on in that respect is, first of all, the fact that we know they were in financial difficulty prior to that. They had gone through a bankruptcy in 2015, and they were heading that same way at the time of the murders. So we know what Chris Watts' income was. We don't know what Shanann's was. We do know they were in serious financial difficulty. Many have dismissed what Nicole Kissinger said about Chris Watts complaining about being housebroke as, well, whatever she says probably doesn't add up. But I find that pretty silly. It was obvious, even to the detective just stepping into the house, that this was a family living beyond their means. It's something that he said, and it's also obvious just in terms of the kind of job Chris Watts had and also the kind of job Shanann had. Even if Shanann was a resounding success, they were living way beyond their means. And one of the ways I've tried to illustrate what we're talking about here is, if you want to sort of take away the magical thinking and just say, okay, let's just take something like a luxury car, like the Lexus. Let's just forget about Thrive and Lavelle. Let's imagine that Shanann was selling candy bars to her friends. How many candy bars would you need to sell in order to make a profit that would earn you a luxury car? That's the reality. Now, you might say, well, that's not really Shanann's concern. It's the company that's employing her. They were very happy with the number of candy bars that she was selling. Bear in mind, it has to be in the company's interest to give her a car, given inverted commas, right? So they're not going to, how many companies do you know that just give you a car based on not doing anything for them? So just think about it in terms of candy bars. How many candy bars would you need to sell in order to make the kind of profit on the candy bar that would earn you a luxury car? Another aspect that's misunderstood is, I hear a lot of people, even 2 years later, talking about the stain on the bedsheet, right? That there was some kind of mark on the bedsheet. And someone on Patreon actually made the fantastic comment earlier where he said, wow, he'd forgotten that Watts had done the laundry, because we were talking about would he have hung the laundry up in terms of the bedding? Would he have, this is on Monday night, would he have hung it up, or would he have put it in a dryer or whatever? And then one of the patrons on Patreon said, wow, he'd forgotten that he'd done the laundry. And then he said, doesn't that explain why they couldn't tell what that stain was on the I think he thought of it as the bed sheet. In other words, because it had already been washed, it was difficult to determine what that stain was, right? Personally, I believe it was excrement. Chris Watts said it was excrement. That is what happens when a body has been, when someone has died. Shortly after the bodies lose control over the digestive mechanism, and a body will quickly flush out all sorts of things, mucus, urine, excrement, etc. And that is why cadaver odor forms so quickly. It's because of this relaxing of the body's controls over its internal systems. Anyway, so I believe that is what that substance is. A lot of people thought it was mascara, in terms of Shanann literally sort of lying in bed and then, I don't know, I guess her face being pushed into the pillow or something like that. I agree that I think she was killed facing away from Chris Watts, but I don't think that it happened in bed. And but the point is, the mistake or the misunderstanding a lot of people have made is assuming that this stain was made in a bed sheet, and it wasn't. It was made on a pillow cover. And there's an image where you can actually clearly see the stain, and it does look like there's a hand behind on the other side of the pillow cover, and that is then used to pick up the substance, the excrement that was probably left in the carpet. Now, I've recently taken custody of a puppy, and I've had to deal with far more excrement than I would like to admit. And it is difficult to get hold of without, if you want to remove it from the surface that it's on, let's say it's on a carpet, it's difficult to remove it without actually depositing it or actually getting more of it onto the carpet. And so you want to protect your own hands using some kind of material, and so I don't know, I think it's just quite natural that one would use something like a cloth or tissue paper, or some kind of material that you'd be prepared to dispose of, like a dirty towel or an old towel or something, or in this case the pillowcase, the whole set, the set of fabric that Chris Watts meant to get rid of because of the sheet at the well site. He didn't want it to be traced back to them. So that's another aspect that I want to highlight. In this case, what I want to highlight is just that it's on the pillow cover. Obviously the pillow wasn't in the cover, and a new cover was put on the pillow and then obviously put on the bed. People talk about Chris Watts, Shanann had to have gone to bed because she changed and she went to sleep and they had sex and all that kind of thing. Well, I think a good way of comparing that is to say, how did this bed sheet, the pillow cover, how did it get out of the pillow? And the answer is Chris Watts took it off the pillow. Chris Watts was someone who did the laundry for the entire household, so he was used to doing that. How did Shanann get out of her clothes? Chris Watts changed her. Chris Watts also took the ring off her finger, the watch off her hand, the phone was placed somewhere else, her handbag was placed somewhere else, all of these things were placed somewhere else. Chris Watts changed his own clothes. Looks like he may have even done it 2 or 3 times. He changed his shoes a number of times as well. So the idea that he would have attacked Shanann and then changed her clothes isn't so surprising. And if you know true crime, you know that clothing is often changed. It was changed in the John Benet Ramsey case. The part that I just want to emphasize here is that the excrement, not mascara, was found on the pillowcase, not on the sheet. And it would make more sense to use something like a pillowcase, which is a smaller piece of fabric, to pick something small up if you were going to throw it away anyway. And effectively, that is virtually the only almost forensic evidence they found in the Watts home, was that little smudge on the pillowcase. That's virtually the only thing they found. There was a little bit of dog signaling, but it wasn't very certain. The dog did bark a lot. We're not quite sure what to make of it. And then, of course, there's the unclear footage from the Trinastich video. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes into this episode, and what I really want to talk about is what I feel is the most misunderstood area of the Chris Watts case. And I think this goes to motive, I think it goes to the timing, I think it goes to the thing that was above all driving Chris Watts to do what he did. And when I say it, I think many of you are going to be surprised, because you just never really hear about it. And what was this? The gender reveal. Now, I think many of us have gotten sidetracked or preoccupied with, did Nicole Kessinger know that Shanann was pregnant? And there are different conversations about that. One aspect that I think seems to support that she did know is Kessinger doesn't seem that shocked or surprised when she's interrogated. She doesn't keep mentioning that aspect, right? And that's a fair comment to make. The counter argument is that Kessinger wasn't on Facebook, and also Shanann's social media was so noisy and so busy it would be difficult to find anything, just because there are so many pictures of Thrive and just so much content that you would have to really be online a lot to find something. On the other hand, Shanann did have pictures saying, that she was, oops, we did it again, and things like that, and including her profile picture. So one can argue it both ways. I think both of those arguments defeat one another, in the sense that what is really going on, I think Chris Watts didn't want the child, and that was definitely a big factor. But I think what was really going on was Kessinger wanted to be reassured that he was getting a divorce, that the divorce was on track, that the family was splitting up, that it was the end of the Watts family. Kessinger wanted to be wanted confirmation of that. And she says in one of her interviews, she said that he told her, I think on the Saturday night during their last date, their last dalliance together, he told her that the divorce is sort of finalized, and he's moving out and he's selling the house, and so all of this was kind of announced on the Saturday night. Now, at the same time, one needs to look at the narrative of the gender reveal. And the narrative of the gender reveal is that the gender reveal was on kind of when they came back from North Carolina, and on the Wednesday, so they flew back from North Carolina on Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday, which I think was the 8th, Nicole Atkinson came to the house, and she sort of babysat the girls, and I think even her parents were there. And Chris Watts and Shanann went to the doctor to do the ultrasound, and just determine that, get the gender of the child, but in an envelope, and that Shanann then handed that to Nicole Atkinson without seeing it. And it was that night, that evening, that Chris Watts said, I don't want the baby, I don't want the gender reveal, and I think we're incompatible. All of that happened Wednesday night. So Wednesday night was a really big moment in the timeline that I also think has been not acknowledged to the extent that it should be, that it needs to be. And so the very next day, early in that night, Shanann couldn't sleep, understandably. She said she needed good news, and she told Addie that he thinks we're not compatible. This is early the next morning. This is the 9th, which is Thursday. And he said that he wants to get a divorce. And so that kind of meant by default that the gender reveal was cancelled. Right? Now, think about that. Why is the gender reveal cancelled? Because they're not going to kind of now make this announcement to the world that they're one big happy family, that there's a welcome new arrival, because Chris Watts is saying, I don't want to be married, and I don't want this child, and I don't want to be a dad, and I don't want to be a husband, and I don't want to be a father to the third child. He didn't say I don't want to be a father to his own children, but that was the state of affairs. So Shanann herself knew, well, I can't have a gender reveal party under these circumstances. I don't want to put a fake happy Chris out there. And so because she kind of accepted that he didn't want to be in the marriage, she herself said, okay, no gender reveal party. And then she kind of went back on that and kind of tried to say, well, let's figure this out. I still love you. I don't want to get divorced. And I think Chris Watts felt like, wow, I'm not going to be able to stay in control here. I'm not going to be able to pull this off. I'm not going to be able to get divorced. I'm not going to. This isn't going to go the way that I need it to go. And so Shanann kind of somehow said, okay, do you want to go to therapy? And anyway, there was some way that she kind of regained control to some extent, and Chris Watts decided to go along with it, right, in the way that he defaulted to as an introvert. And he then allowed her to say, okay, well, let's do the gender reveal on Monday, and let's go away for couples thing over the weekend, which is when the gender reveal was originally scheduled. So the gender reveal was on, then it was cancelled, then it was rescheduled to Monday. And what was Chris doing? He was playing for time, and he was making final preparations, given that he'd tried everything to not to get divorced, but to try and control things the best way that he knew how. I'm certainly not saying what he was doing was a good way, lying to people and deceiving and trying to bring about a miscarriage. But the thing is, if the gender reveal had taken place on Monday, and I think it would have been like a social media gender reveal. Bear in mind, Monday was the day that Shanann would have been home for the first time, and it would be for a long time. And so Monday would have been when the gender reveal would have happened. It would have been on social media. It would have been a little bit of a less big thing than it was originally meant to be. And what would happen? The gender reveal would reveal that they were still together as a couple. So irrespective of whether we think Kissinger knew or didn't know about the baby, what she definitely didn't know was that there was no real plans to get divorced. There was the little bit of mentioning it to Shanann on the Wednesday, and this is after the whole week that they spent together in North Carolina. So even though they were together, they hardly spoke, and she just found him standoffish and didn't have a very good week. But he only sort of broke the news to her. Finally, it said, okay, it's over. He did that on the Wednesday night. And so the gender reveal was going to reveal that he'd been lying to both of them. He couldn't permit the gender reveal to happen because Kissinger would then know, at least as far as Shanann was concerned, they were still happily married. They were still going to stay married. They were still working on it. Shanann was still invested in the marriage. Shanann felt that they were going to move together into a house in Brighton, not Chris Watts selling the house independently and moving to a house independently. She was going to move with him, and that was something he couldn't afford. And you could argue, did Chris Watts know that Kissinger would find out because she was monitoring Facebook or social media, or that her friends would find out because that same weekend, Sunday, Watts had, I think, found out that Kissinger had told Charlotte about him and said, I really like him. It's very early, and that, I think, really worried him. And he mentioned earlier deleting his Facebook. I think he mentioned this in Letters to Christopher, that he deleted his Facebook because he'd found out that Kissinger had told her friends about him. So it was very important, based on this information leaking out to Kissinger's friends, that Shanann not say, well, we're happily married, or things are so great, I think Chris is awesome. That's something that she'd been doing all along. She'd been saying what a great father he was on his birthday, and what a great dad he was on Father's Day, and he really didn't want her to do this related to the gender reveal. Does that make sense? So I feel the gender reveal is really important. If Shanann didn't die when she died, the gender reveal would have happened the day that she died, or the afternoon when they came back from, when she came back from her visit to the doctor, and also Chris Watts had come back from work. That was probably when it would have happened. Also, there's a good chance that if she had gone to the doctor, if Chris Watts had been using high doses of oxy on Shanann, it may have come up in a blood test. The doctor may have said, wow, something weird is going on here. Bear in mind, there was a sort of clean bill of health during the visit to the doctor on the night of Wednesday, the 8th of August. But that may not have been the case on the Monday. Shanann felt sick the whole weekend. She was sick with worry, but she was also feeling out of sorts. She was so ill that when they were in Arizona, Cassie and Nicole kind of babysat her, kind of sat with her in the hotel foyer rather than going sightseeing, because Shanann wasn't well enough to go out. She actually said to him also on the day that she flew out that she feels too weak to stand. So he may have given her a really high dose on the morning that she flew out, and maybe he was worried that was still in her system, and he couldn't let her go to the doctor because then he'd be found out. So there were a couple of driving factors, but I think the foremost among them was the gender reveal. Okay, I'm not going to take things further than that. I'm going to do one more episode in this little trio of content and coverage, and that's going to be just on the crime scene. When did 2825 Saratoga Trail stop being a crime scene? And I'm also going to just quickly acknowledge the sort of contention that the investigation was botched, and there's something wrong with the investigation and it should be reopened. That whole nonsense, I'm going to deal with that in the next episode. Again, I want to encourage those of you who are interested in the Watts case, but also interested in true crime in general. If you're interested in well-researched content by someone who writes books about the case and other high-profile cases, consider joining the group of us on Patreon. It's just $1 a month, and you get access to quite a lot of content. A lot of it is updated daily. Currently, there's a series on Nicole Kissinger and also the Chris Watts tapes, but there's also ongoing analysis on other high-profile cases such as Suzanne Morphew, missing at the moment. Also, Gannon Stork. There was a lot of content on that. Also written a book about that, Boy Interrupted, and other cases as they come up. Durst, also Madeleine McCann, John Benet Ramsey, all the high-profile cases. So if you're interested in true crime, that's definitely an area you want to head to. And you'll find a great group of people there who are also very well informed, and you're going to be able to have mature, interesting, engaging, well-mannered conversations without throwing stones and without that sort of immaturity. So it's a nice group of people. I also have a bunch of audiobooks on the $5 tier. The $5 tier's got shorter audiobooks, and then the $10 tier has got much longer. At the moment, I'm uploading Two-Face Beneath the Oil. I think I'm on chapter 7 or 8, and if you subscribe to the $5 tier, then you get access to all of those books. You can listen to all of them in 1 month, or take your time. And those are obviously read by me, having written them a couple of months ago. And then that's also subject of discussion. You have people listening to the audiobooks, commenting below, raising interesting points, and some of them are really interesting in hindsight. It's very interesting looking at what we didn't know at the time, what we did know now, and then putting them together. Okay, so that's it for me. One thing I can tell you from where I am in the world, it's very cold here. We've had a cold snap. The temperature plunged below zero for the first time this year, and obviously it's winter in the southern hemisphere. And something that's really surprising is there are swallows nesting where I stay, and they haven't left to summer elsewhere, so it's really weird. And I really thought that they're going to leave now, with the weather going cold. And last night, sort of at sunset, when they come back from wherever they were, they came back again. So I'm sort of a little bit concerned about them. I'm concerned they're going to be able to find food through the winter. And we're in a weird place, the world right now. We're in a place where the worldwide temperature seems to be increasing despite the whole world economy grinding to a halt for a couple of months. I find that quite scary. And also, the northern hemisphere is activating again in the commerce side of things, and the southern hemisphere as well, believe it or not. Despite us going into our winter, and we certainly where I am, we minus the flu season because of so many weeks of lockdown. There's kind of been no flu going around, so we've avoided that. But we're kind of at the stage where the country has to open up now because we've been locked down for so long, and it's at the worst possible time as our cases are reaching their peak. So we're expecting a bit of an explosion in cases here over the next month, and they're expecting our peak to be in July or August. So we've slowed it down, but it's likely to be, we're likely to see a lot of cases coming up. So that's something I also cover on Patreon in my coronavirus diaries. I just provide some updates on the situation here, and just commentary on the stats and on just on what is going on. And so for those interested in talking about that and finding out what is going on in other countries, that's also on Patreon. There are people all over the world: Sweden, Australia, Canada, the UK. So all people from all over that are also sort of thinking about that aspect, and what's the best course of action for us. So if you want to be part of a community that is considerate to one another, and careful and thoughtful in terms of our approach to one another and the society we live in, consider joining True Crime Rocket Science on Patreon. It's patreon.com/TCRS. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.